أتيتك يا خالقي باكيا ودمع الأسى كل حين يزيد فقد قلت في الآي لا تقنطوا وإن تعف عني فذا يوم عيد وإن تعف عني.
الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. In our last lesson, we spoke about some of the earliest collections we had in the books of Sunan. We spoke about Sunan al-Darimi and we spoke about Sunan ibn Majah. And today, inshallah, we want to speak about another collection in this category. And this is a collection by Imam Abū Dāwūd, Sulaymān ibn al-Ashʿath as-Sijistānī, who was born in the year 202 after the Hijrah in the province of Sijistān. And Sijistān, I guess, would be modern-day southeastern Afghanistan, stretching into parts of Iran. And although Imam Abū Dāwūd rahmatullahi alayhi was born there, his ancestry traces back to Yemen from the tribe of Azad. And his forefathers had traveled to that region when it was being conquered, and they remained there until the time Abū Dāwūd rahmatullahi alayhi was born. And just like other scholars that we spoke about before, he began to take knowledge from the people of that area before he started his travels to take knowledge from the scholars of other regions. And at the age of 18, he traveled to Mecca to perform Hajj, and it is there that he took knowledge from Sulaymān ibn Harb, and he also took from Abdullah ibn Maslab ibn Qa'nab, who we said is referred to as al-Qa'nabi. And he traveled to other areas as well, such as Basra and Kufa in Iraq, and he went to, in Kufa actually, he took from Uthman ibn Abi Shayba, the brother of Abu Bakr ibn Abi Shayba, and he traveled to Turkey, and he traveled to areas in Sham, such as Halab and Hims and Dimashq, and he traveled to Egypt and Khurasan, and in Khurasan, that's where he took from Ishaq ibn Rahway, and he traveled again to Iraq, and in Baghdad, he took from Yahya ibn Ma'in, and he took from Ali ibn al-Madini, and he took from Ahmad ibn Hanbal. And in fact, Yahya ibn Ma'in and Ahmad ibn Hanbal would become some of his greatest shuyukh, some of the most influential scholars on Abū Dāwūd. He included many narrations from them in his book that we're going to discuss inshallah in a bit. And when it comes to Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Imam Abū Dāwūd, he actually recorded many of the statements of Imam Ahmad when it came to certain men. So he has a separate collection where he just wrote about the statements of Imam Ahmad, either asking Imam Ahmad about the status of certain men, or hearing what Imam Ahmad had to say to others about certain men. And he recorded this collection in a book that is referred to as Su'ālāt Abī Dāwūd li Ahmad ibn Hanbal fi Jarh al-Riwāti wa Ta'dīlihim. Basically the questions of Imam Abū Dāwūd to Ahmad ibn Hanbal when it comes to the criticism of some of the narrators, or confirming their good status, like how good, whether they're reliable narrators or not. And as for the students of Imam Ahmad, then they include Imam al-Tirmidhi rahmatullahi alayh. And al-Tirmidhi actually recorded from Abū Dāwūd in his Jami', which we'll speak about in our next lesson inshallah. And from his students also are Abu Bakr al-Khallal and Abu Ubayd al-Ajuri. And Abu Ubayd al-Ajuri, he actually has a collection similar to the collection that Abū Dāwūd has of Imam Ahmad, where he would ask Imam Abū Dāwūd about the status of certain men and record them in this collection. And amongst those who studied under Abū Dāwūd or took from him are Abu Awana, and he has a collection called the Musnad, which we're going to speak about inshallah as well. And even though Imam Ahmad was one of the most influential teachers on Abū Dāwūd, Imam Ahmad also recorded a hadith from Abū Dāwūd, a single hadith as far as we know, but still he took a hadith from Abū Dāwūd. And some even accepted An-Nasa'i as being a student of Imam Abū Dāwūd, but Wallahu ta'ala alam, when it comes to his Sunan, whenever he says Haddathana Abū Dāwūd, we were informed by Abū Dāwūd, it seems like he's not referring to the Abū Dāwūd who we're speaking of here, Sulaymān ibn al-Ashʿath, but he's actually speaking about Sulaymān ibn Sayf al-Harrani, who he narrated much from. But in his book Al-Kuna, he does speak about, he does say he heard from Sulaymān ibn al-Ashʿath, although he doesn't say it's Abū Dāwūd. Wallahu ta'ala, it seems to be Abū Dāwūd, the Abū Dāwūd that we're speaking of here, Sulaymān ibn al-Ashʿath as-Sijistānī. So Wallahu ta'ala alam, but it's quite possible that Imam al-Nasa'i was also a student of Abū Dāwūd. As for the works of Abū Dāwūd himself, then he authored a number of collections besides the one that we're going to speak about today. He has a book called Al-Marasil, and this is an important collection that speaks about that he records narrations where he considered them to be Mursal, meaning that there's a disconnect in the chain, either from the tabi'i who's narrating it or somewhere else, another break in the chain. But this is basically a defect. We would consider this to be a defect that normally weakens the hadith, but we'll speak about that in just a moment, inshallah. And the reason why this is an important book, because if we find the hadith mentioned in there that maybe some scholars authenticated afterwards, but Abū Dāwūd mentioned it in his Marasil, then this is a pretty good indication that there's a weakness to this hadith, despite some people who may have authenticated it afterwards. So this is an important collection, especially for the students of knowledge and the scholars of hadith. He also authored a book called Al-Nasikh wal-Mansukh, the abrogating and the abrogated, and this is a collection that is lost to us today. We don't have it. And he also has another book called Ar-Radd ala al-Qadariyya, and this was mentioned by other scholars as being a book attributed to Abū Dāwūd, but again, this is a book that we don't have as well. And Abū Dāwūd also has a book on the signs of prophethood, and this was mentioned by a number of earlier scholars called A'lam al-Nubuwah. And to the best of my knowledge, from what I've read, there is a manuscript of this collecting dust somewhere on a shelf in a library in Germany. And no one has ever, I guess, really had an opportunity to take it and put it together into a book that we're able to have between our hands today. And from what I understand, even in that library, it's not referred to as A'lam al-Nubuwah, but it's referred to as, or they have it recorded as Dalā'il al-Nubuwah. So inshallah, maybe this is something that we'll have between us in our hands in the future. And he has a book called Kitab al-Zuhd, which is a collection of 521 narrations, where he speaks about, where he includes narrations from the Sahaba and the Tabi'een, specifically narrations having to do with asceticism. So about the zuhd of some of the Sahaba and the Tabi'een, or what they had to say about these things. And the collection we want to discuss today is a collection that Abū Dāwūd himself called as-Sunan. So this title that we have, Sunan Abi Dawud, it's actually a title given to it by the author himself, Abū Dāwūd. And this is a collection of 5,274 aḥādīth, arranged under various fiqh topics and chapter headings. And he put this collection together while he was a murabit in Tarsus rather. And a murabit is someone who sort of safeguards the frontiers of the Muslims. So at that time it would have been against the Romans, and he actually was stationed there for about 20 years, and it was during this time that he put the collection of Sunan Abi Dawud. So you can see that the scholars of that time, not only were they authors, but they were people who defended the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and fought for the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. So they weren't people who just sat behind their books and wrote and spoke with little action behind them, but he was a murabit, which is a great status that a person can have in Islam. And because this is a book of Sunan, you won't find in it much having to do with tafsir. You won't find much in it having to do with the virtues of the Prophet ﷺ or the virtues of the Sahaba, or much to do with the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. It is a book focused on Sunan and arranged under chapter headings accordingly. And one of the great things about this book, or in addition that we have to this book, is that Imam Abū Dāwūd, he was asked by the people of Mecca why or what criteria he used to include the aḥādīth in his books. And because of this, we actually have a risālah from Abū Dāwūd, a letter from Abū Dāwūd to the people of Mecca, explaining to them how he came to include the collections that we have in this book today, what led him to include these specific narrations and maybe not other narrations. And from this risālah, we learn a number of things, but some of the things that I'll just mention here today is that he limited the number of aḥādīth that he included under a chapter. So he might have a chapter on a specific thing having to do with salat, or a bab, a specific bab, like a heading under a chapter. So the chapter would be, for example, Kitab al-Salat, the book of Salat, and he would have a chapter heading under that. So these chapter headings, he only included maybe one or two narrations having to do with it. And the reason for that is that if there were other narrations that could have been included, he only included what he felt would be of greater benefit from the narrations that are available. So he included one or two that he felt these narrations would be from the greatest benefit to those who read it. And the other thing that he mentions in his risālah is that if he repeated a hadith in his Sunan, it's because the repetition has an addition or some wording that maybe we don't find in the other narration that he included. So this is one of the reasons that he included repetition in this in his book. Unlike, for example, when we spoke about Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, where they may have included the same hadith with the exact same wording under different chapters just because they happen to fall under the chapter heading that they included it under. So it could be something having to do with jihad and having to do with fasting, so they included it in the book of jihad and they included it in the book of fasting. Whereas Abū Dāwūd, when he included a repetition, it was because there was an addition to the wording of that hadith or maybe a different phrasing of that hadith, and this is why he included it. The other thing that we learned from his risālah is that if he could not find the hadith that's muttasal means that it has a connected isnad, like a chain from himself, being the one who's reporting the hadith, all the way to the one who's narrating the hadith, no break in the chain. So Abū Dāwūd, if he couldn't find the hadith that's actually muttasal, it is then that he used the hadith that he considered mursal. And this is because Abū Dāwūd, he relied on mursal aḥādīth. So he considered it to be a hujjah, he considered it to be evidence or proof. And so if you couldn't find a hadith that's muttasal, then it's only then that he included a hadith that is considered mursal. So again, a mursal narration is a narration where there's either a break in the chain somewhere in the chain, or more commonly nowadays people more commonly refer to a mursal hadith as a hadith where a tabi'i narrates it without mentioning who he took it from to the one who's narrating the hadith. So there could be another tabi'i missing, or sometimes just a sahabi that's missing. So there could be one or even more people missing from that chain. And the other thing that Abū Dāwūd mentions in his risālah is that he did not include anyone who was matrūk. And what's meant by matrūk is someone who's abandoned by the scholars of hadith. And others recorded the statement of his as someone who was agreed upon being matrūk by the scholars. So meaning someone that the majority or the scholars of note in hadith, they rejected this person. And this might be the more better statement to use, that he didn't include anyone who was agreed upon to be matrūk, because we will find people in his Sunan that scholars mentioned were matrūk. So we do find narrations in his collection that we know are, that the narrators are known to be matrūk. And the other thing that we find is that if there is a hadith in his book that contains a severe weakness, Abū Dāwūd, so if there's a hadith in his book that contains a severe weakness, Abū Dāwūd himself would not remain silent about it, but rather he would speak about it. And whatever he remained silent about, then he considered it to be salih. مَا لَمْ أَذْكُرْ فِيهِ شَيْئًا فَهُوَ صالح. So he says that if I didn't mention anything about it, then this is a salih narration. And we're going to speak of what that means in a moment here. And then he continues and he says, وَبَعْضُهَا أَصَحُّ مِنْ بَعْضٍ. And some of them are more confirmed than others. And the point I want to clarify here is that there's a misunderstanding when it comes to the silence of Abū Dāwūd when it comes to a hadith. So some misunderstood it to mean that if Abū Dāwūd is silent on a hadith, then he accepts it to be sahih. Ibn Abd al-Barr, he took this opinion. He says, for example, that whatever Abū Dāwūd remains silent about, then it is sahih, especially if it is the only hadith under that specific heading. So Ibn Abd al-Barr took that opinion and he was criticized for that opinion. Imam al-Dhahabi rahmatullahi alayh, he understood from this to mean that if Abū Dāwūd was silent on a hadith, then it meant that this hadith was hasan, meaning it is similar in acceptability to a hadith that's sahih, and al-Dhahabi was criticized for this as well. And some said that what he meant from it was the linguistic sense of salih means something that can be relied on or something that can be taken into consideration. So these are some of the opinions we have, but the correct opinion when it comes to the silence of Abū Dāwūd on a hadith is what we find from Imam al-Nawawi and others. And Imam al-Nawawi rahmatullahi alayhi stated, he said, no attention should be paid to the silence of Abū Dāwūd. Rather, one has to look into the isnad, and if weakness is found, then we have to judge it to be weak. So Imam al-Nawawi rahmatullahi alayhi stated this, and in fact Ibn Hajar even criticized Imam al-Nawawi for this, and he said that this is the correct opinion when it comes to the silence of Abū Dāwūd. But then he criticized Imam al-Nawawi, saying that he acted differently in his book Sharh al-Muhadhab, which is a book where he speaks about the fiqh of the madhab of Imam al-Shafi'i. He said that he acted differently when it came to this book, for he used as evidence many aḥādīth based on the silence of Abū Dāwūd. So even though he says that no attention should be paid to the silence of Abū Dāwūd in his book Sharh al-Muhadhab, he included aḥādīth, or he accepted aḥādīth based on the silence of Abū Dāwūd. So this is something that we need to pay attention to, because a lot of people say Imam Abū Dāwūd remained silent about it, means he accepted it, and that is not necessarily the case. In any case, these are matters that can be discussed. These are matters that can be discussed further on, inshallah, as we go deeper into the study of the sciences of hadith. But for now, suffice it to say, the Sunan of Abū Dāwūd is an extremely important collection and beneficial collection for the people of Ahl-us-Sunnah. And similar to other books, the majority of the narrations in it are authentic. So the majority of the other books we've discussed so far, the majority of the narrations are authentic, and but we will find weak narrations in it as well. When it comes to the books of Sunan that we discussed so far, we would definitely place the Sunan of Abū Dāwūd, for example, above the Sunan of Ibn Majah. And we'll speak about, in our next lesson, we'll speak about the Jami' of At-Tirmidhi. And then we'll also speak a little bit later on about the Sunan of An-Nasa'i, and we'll give it sort of a comparison between these books, which one we consider to be highest in terms of level of authenticity. And we'll just conclude, I guess, by saying that Imam Abū Dāwūd, he died in the year 275 after the Hijrah. And again, in our next lesson, we'll speak about the Jami' of At-Tirmidhi. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.